Resuming debate, the honourable member for Lakeland.
Madam Speaker, Parliament is still at a standstill after 6 weeks because the Liberals refused to turn over documents related to their Sustainable Development Technology Canada Fund, the SDTC, or better known by Canadians now more accurately as the Liberal Green Slush Fund. Common sense Conservatives want transparency and accountability for Canadians about the Liberals' repeated pattern of entitled and immoral abuse of Canadian tax dollars. None of the money belongs to government. It belongs to the people. Canadians are right to ask what the government is covering up as the Liberals continue to ignore an order from most MPs to provide unredacted documents related to its $400 million Green Slush Fund scandal. In June, my common sense Conservative colleague from South Short St. Margaret's uncovered it when he requested a breakdown of the approved funding by the Liberals' tax dollar slush fund. The information is crucial, too, for the RCMP to properly investigate alleged corruption among Liberal insiders at the slush fund, since the RCMP has said an investigation is ongoing. Even the Prime Minister's Speaker has said, quote, "The House has the undoubted right to order the production of any and all documents from any entity or individual it deems necessary to carry out its duties."
Point of order, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary of the Government House Leader.
Madam Speaker, I'm sure you would be concerned. The member indicated that it's the Prime Minister's Speaker. The Speaker serves all members, and that should be pointed out.
Appreciate that, and it is something that's been brought up on a number of occasions. I just want to remind members that the Speaker is elected by this House and represents everybody rules the House impartially for everyone in the House. So the honourable member for Lakeland.
Thank you. And that very Speaker has, of course, said the House has that undoubted right to order the production for all of those documents, and so they should give it to us. So common sense Conservatives are here to hold this government accountable for its failures, corruption, and wrongdoing. MPs request these documents for scrutiny, not only by the RCMP, but also by members of Parliament, as is our duty to Canadians who send us here to represent them. In response, government departments either outright refused to comply or heavily covered up the documents they did provide, using the Privacy Act or Access to Information Act to justify the hidden sections. The truth is, nothing within the House order justified such redactions. The House of Commons possesses absolute and unrestricted power on behalf of all Canadians, grounded in the Constitution Act and the Parliament of Canada Act, to order document production unbound by statutory limits. After the government blocked out and withheld the requested documents, our common sense Conservative House Leader, the member for Regina Capel, brought this motion because MPs' rights to get information for Canadians have been violated by the government's refusal to comply. Now, personally, I hate the use of the customary word privilege for these debates, because for me, what it's always actually about is my duty as an elected representative and the rights of my constituents to know. While it's sad to say, the scandals and cover-ups of this government are no longer surprising. After 9 years, the Liberals have shown shocking disregard for transparency and adherence to the rule of law. It's never been more clear this government, backed by its accomplices in the NDP, is not worth the cost or their corruption. Of the $1 billion involved, nearly half is now in question for being distributed inappropriately. That's no small amount, especially when Canadians are struggling with historically high living costs and financial burdens because of this federal government's inflationary tax and spend agenda. This $400 million in tax dollars could have been used to aid vulnerable people, or to stop crime, or build the homes, or fix the budget, or keep it in the pockets of Canadians in the first place. Instead, this NDP Liberal coalition is digging in to carry on their cover-up while blaming everyone else like usual. 5 months ago, the Independent Auditor General revealed that nearly $500 million of those tax dollars were funneled by officials to their own companies through improperly awarded contracts. The AG found that there were 186 conflicts of interest in this corrupt in-and-out scam among politically appointed senior government officials and super-wealthy elites. It's particularly appalling that during the 6 weeks of the NDP Liberals' cover-up, Food Banks Canada's new report said food bank use is record high, worse than last year, which was already a horrifying record. 2 million Canadians are forced to go to food banks in just 1 month. The most heartbreaking part is a third of the visits are desperate people struggling to feed children, all caused by the NDP Liberals' inflationary taxes, spending, and red tape. St. Paul's Food Bank in Lakeland has served over 5,000 adults and nearly 4,000 children so far in 2024, a town with less than 6,000 people. The Vermilion Food Bank struggles with a 7% increase in adults and a 46% increase in the number of children they support this year compared to last. These people report in conversations that the cost of food, housing, utilities, power, fuel, it all affects and hurts them the most. After 9 years, the NDP Liberals have made everything too expensive for everyone, and they're making out just fine for themselves. 10 years ago, the New York Times headline read, "Life in Canada, home of the world's most affluent middle class." That was 2014, when Canada had the richest middle class in the world and the median income was higher than in the United States under the former Conservative government. Today, Canadian workers earn $34,000 less than their American counterparts after the Liberal tax hikes and economic vandalism. What happened in 2015? Well, the Liberals came to power. And today, they have hurt Canadians everywhere. Life has never been so difficult for everyday Canadians, but it's never been so good for rich elite NDP Liberal buddies and cronies. Now, it was only after the Prime Minister's handpicked Liberal board members were installed that the slush fund began approving excessive amounts of tax dollars for itself while hiding this corrupt redirection to companies owned by board members. In fact, the organization was deemed in good standing before these board members were appointed by the Liberals. Even though the Prime Minister is warned of the risks associated with appointing a conflicted chair, she was appointed anyways to chair the board that did not even have the minimum number of members required by law. It's really obvious that the government has lost its moral compass, that they knew there were conflicts of interest, they were warned, and they just didn't care. All of this could be resolved right now if any Liberal would stand up right now and announce that all documents Parliament has requested will be produced. But they won't. Instead, they distract, evade, divide, and gaslight. The blindingly obvious question is why? Well, Canadians can be forgiven for suspecting that they're full of details the Liberals want to hide. Canadians are rightfully concerned about all of this Liberal corruption. Kyle from Lakeland says, quote, "I'm absolutely horrified that people still put trust in this Liberal government. It's very hard for people to buy gas and groceries nowadays, and I'm just absolutely upset." Nick from Lakeland said, quote, "Not only are Canadians fed up with the Prime Minister and his party's actions, they are losing faith in the very institutions of freedom and democracy, which are being made a mockery of by this government." But it was the current Prime Minister who victoriously said in 2015, quote, "Sunny ways, my friends, sunny ways." You want a Prime Minister who knows that if Canadians are to trust their government, the government needs to trust Canadians. A PM who understands that openness and transparency means better, smarter decisions. Well, after 9 years, they're worse and dumber decisions, aren't they? And after 9 years, a flailing PM and the Liberals are the opposite of everything they claimed. This ongoing cover-up speaks to the very core of Canadian democracy and the accountability we owe to the people that each of us represent here. It's not just about some bureaucratic documents. It's not about some parliamentary procedure. It's about upholding the principles of good governance that are crucial to maintain already almost non-existent public trust in government and elected representatives. The ongoing redactions and refusals to release key documents reveal much about the real character of this government and their allies. These are not the actions of people with nothing to hide. One of the worst offenders is, of course, the radical, previously arrested Environment Minister. He continues even today to profit off the corruption in his government's Green Slush Fund. Cycle Capital received hundreds of millions of dollars from the slush fund, but the Environment Minister lobbied the Liberals on behalf of his company, Cycle Capital, nearly 25 times before he was elected in 2019. One of the Cycle Capital board members now admits to committee that several of her companies received millions of dollars from the slush fund while she sat on the board of the slush fund. So still today, the Environment Minister holds interests in Cycle Capital while it receives tax money Talk about a conflict of interest. But no wonder the NDP Liberals are working so hard to cover up this massive scandal. Of course, it's far from the first time the Liberals have breached Parliament's and government's rules. Take the Winnipeg lab scandal, where scientists gave a hostile regime classified information from Canada's top virus lab for foreign intervention. What was the Prime Minister's response to the House's demand for transparency? Well, he chose to sue the Speaker to prevent disclosure and then called an election to try to get away with it all, even though his Speaker had formally reprimanded the Public Health Agency of Canada in an unprecedented act for a Speaker in nearly a century. Then there's the Net Zero Accelerator, another costly Liberal sham that fails to deliver, just like almost every single thing they say on the environment. Similar to the Liberals' Housing Accelerator that doesn't actually build houses, the Net Zero Accelerator is not about proven emissions reduction. According to the Environment Commissioner, $8 billion was handed out to ineligible companies that lacked any real emissions reduction plans or outcomes. Only 6 months ago, his report highlighted that this money was, quote, not part of any coherent policy on decarbonization. He reported that the vast majority of funded projects had no formal commitment to cut emissions by any specified amount. And now, to no one's surprise, the Prime Minister's favorite new economic advisor, carbon tax Mark Carney, has also flagged in a potential conflict of interest with the government and his company, Brookfield Assets Management, which could involve billions of Canadians' money. The Globe and Mail reports the government's in talks to give Brookfield 10 billion Canadian tax dollars, 10 billion, where carbon tax Carney is the chair and holds $1 million in stock options. This screams conflict of interest, but once again, the Prime Minister turns a blind eye because this kind of behavior, it always starts at the top. It's outrageous he gave carbon tax Carney the position to advise on economic and fiscal policy when it does relate to the very company he chairs, but he's been shielded by it so that he won't have to declare his conflict of interest being a political advisor. It's clear that Liberals know he's in a conflict of interest, but still appointed him and deliberately hide the facts from Canadians. So that begs the question, how much money will he personally profit from in his conflict of interest with Brookfield and the government? Well, that's obvious to all Canadians. The NDP and Liberals worked hard to protect him from answering questions at committee. And you know what? Despite what they claim, pushing for transparency is not a threat to privacy or due process. It's a call for accountability, including the Privacy Commissioner and other officials in the investigation is a necessary step toward a fair, comprehensive review. Of course, this is all a recurring pattern. Time and again, information is kept from Canadians and the official opposition as the government prevents Conservatives from getting that information for Canadians about government fiscal mismanagement and scandals, because you know what? Canadians do deserve to know exactly what governments are doing with their money and exactly what the hell is going on here. Now, unlike many officials, the Privacy Commissioner did provide unredacted documents and walk the talk on transparency that aligns with principles of public trust and accountability. It's notable as the Privacy Commissioner is perhaps the most qualified authority on the delicate balance between privacy and transparency. He knows the complexities and potential risks, but ultimately found it reasonable and responsible to release them in full. He signals a commitment to transparency and trustworthiness that's in stark contrast to the persistent opposition from the Liberal government. The NDP Liberals claim the release could infringe privacy rights or cause other issues while they themselves perpetuate harm to the public's trust. If the Privacy Commissioner, a literal expert in privacy rights, believes unredacted disclosures are appropriate, then it's fair and necessary to question the sincerity of this government's resistance. There are the whistleblowers who have come forward to call out that blatant corruption. One said, quote, I think the current government is more interested in protecting themselves and protecting the situation from being a public nightmare. They would rather protect wrongdoers and financial mismanagement than have to deal with a situation like the slush fund in the public sphere. Another said, quote, just as I was always confident that the Auditor General would confirm the financial mismanagement, I remain equally confident that the RCMP will substantiate the criminal activities that occurred within the organization. That's from a whistleblower who was there. And if that wasn't damning enough, the whistleblower said, quote, the true failure of the situation stands at the feet of our current government, whose decision to protect wrongdoers and cover up their findings is a serious indictment. democratic systems and institutions are being corrupted by political interference. It should never reach this point. What should have been a straightforward process turned into a bureaucratic nightmare that allowed SDTC to continue wasting millions of dollars and abusing countless employees over the last year. That's what a whistleblower said. The Auditor General found evidence that the Liberals slush fund handed out $58 million to projects without a promise that the terms for the money were actually met. Another $58 million went to 10 projects deemed ineligible as environmental benefits or green technology development could not actually even be proven. This should shock all Canadians, but that's a well-known pattern after 9 years. Corruption runs deep. And despite all their claims, the Liberals repeatedly opt for secrecy over openness, avoidance over accountability. But their actual track record is a series of increasing scandals and corruption where information is obscured, withheld, or trickles out only after pressure from the opposition, the public, or the media. In the last 3 years alone, it's reached a staggering level no matter how much they scramble to cover it up. And it's more clear than ever that the NDP Liberals focus on protecting their own power and their own agendas instead of on serving Canadians. The Liberals wail and flail to deflect and insist the RCMP should not get these unredacted documents. And they're willing to stop all of Parliament to distract from the fact that they don't want Canadians to see the information they deserve. The RCMP has already received redacted versions, so why not allow them access to full unaltered documents? Canadians should ask themselves, why would a government so strongly resist if they have nothing to hide? If the truth is straightforward, then the solution is equally so. Release the unredacted documents. Every argument from the NDP Liberals is smoke and mirror, deflection, distraction, division, attempt to defend indefensible actions, all a calculated strategy to justify actions that threaten the very foundations of our parliamentary democracy. Common sense Conservatives say that's why, among so many other reasons, Canadians deserve a carbon tax election so they can decide, and the Liberals should call one if they have nothing to hide. That's right. This isn't just a disagreement over documents. It's an assault on Parliament's authority and an affront to the principles of transparency and accountability that our democracy is built on, that all the men and women and their loved ones that we are remembering in Remembrance Week who fought and died for, those values, those principles, the rule of law, democracy, accountability, that is what is at stake here. That's what this is all about. And it's never been more clear that after 9 years, the Liberals' corruption, chaos and crime is just not worth the cost. It is happening because the Prime Minister has engaged in what can only be described as economic vandalism, with punishing taxes and reckless spending driving Canada's decline. That trust fund multimillionaire uses taxes like his own personal piggy bank for himself and his rich cronies. But after 9 years, they've caused the steepest decline in living standards seen in the past 4 decades. Canadians are facing unprecedented housing crisis, the sharpest drop in income per person, the lowest economic growth against OECD countries, and make no mistake, these NDP Liberals will continue to just make it worse. What Canadians are experiencing is not a coincidence. It's a direct result of all of the NDP Liberal policies that have enabled corruption, mismanagement, and a lack of transparency. It's our fundamental job, MP's fundamental job, to represent the Canadian people. We're elected to this place not for our own political or personal gain or advancement or titles, but to represent the concerns and the needs of the people who send us here and who make this country so great. So as we honor those brave Canadians who fought and sacrificed so much for our freedoms and all their loved ones who sacrificed right along with them, we must recommit ourselves to upholding the principles that they defended. Those courageous individuals didn't just fight for our borders. They fought to safeguard the values that define Canada: freedom, democracy, the rule of law, justice. Today and every day, it's our duty to protect those values by demanding transparency and accountability from government. It's not just about good governance either. It's about ensuring that the freedoms that serving military members and veterans secure at great cost are not taken for granted, are not eroded. We owe it to those who served and to the generations who will follow to ensure that Canada remains a nation, or can become again a nation, where truth, integrity, and justice prevail. Let us never forget that the peace and comfort we enjoy are hard-won. It's our sacred obligation to remember, and it's our responsibility to uphold the principles for which so many Canadians gave and give their lives. By doing so, we honor their memory, not just in words, but in actions. The Liberals need to stop the cover-up. They need to hand over the evidence. They need to let Parliament get back to working on behalf of all Canadians. If they have nothing to hide, they should call a carbon tax election to let Canadians decide, to end wasteful spending, restore accountability, bring home transparency to Ottawa, because all Canadians, I think, by now know that only common sense Conservatives will work to turn hurt into hope, to axe the tax, to build the homes, to fix the budget, and to stop the crime. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Hey, way to go.